Good afternoon and welcome to our work session. Today is Tuesday, September 21st. Our board members present in the boardroom are members Wilson, Lessons, Jacobs, Higgins, and Bellamy. Online or virtually, we have member Donnelly.
Madam President, Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'd just like the record to show that I've got a whopping bad cold. It's not COVID. I got tested twice, but it is really, I didn't want to risk bringing
you.
the boardroom.
So yes, thank you. We appreciate that, Member Donnelly. Take care of yourself and thank you for taking care of us as well. So, we're going to start with our item B on our agenda, and that is our request for information. And so on your screen, in just a second, you'll see what we have in the queue. Okay, that's okay, take your time. And if board members have additional RFIs, we can add them to the list today. We only have one that we have not prioritized or decided how they would be responded to. So while she's looking, are there any other requests for informations? Or do you need an update on one? Okay. How about you, Member Donnelly? Any RFIs for you this time around? Okay, thank you. Okay, so the one that we have right now is from Member Lessons. Member Lessons, I'm going to let you explain, give more context to your request, if you would, please.
Sure, thank you very much. This was, almost a week ago. And I think it was immediately following the change in quarantine protocol. And I thought it would be useful for the public to know what our quarantine situation looked like. I had seen references to that internal data existed and that many students had been quarantined, but what does that look like? Does that adequately express sort of the urgency of the situation? And I thought that putting in a request for information about this and maybe breaking it down to, if possible, understand which students are affected. And I was thinking specifically about, the categories that we had been going over in the reading proficiency, if those are categories of analysis that we'll be commonly using. So I just wanted to know who the kids were that were affected by quarantine and really what the scope was.
So I guess, because that seems like a lot of work to me, I'll let the superintendent respond. That seems like a lot of work with 90 schools and trying to come up with the number of students who were quarantined every day since the start of the school year. So we updated the dashboard to give the public more information. So I'm on the outside looking in, but it seems to me to be an enormous request. But I'll let Dr. Bishop, could you respond?
Sure. Through the president to Member Lessons, and it would be a great deal of work. So we would have to understand what gets off the table. In regard to quarantining, a lot of what the information that we do get also is just given to us by parents. So we don't actually have hard data on it. It's just, we think you may have been exposed by parents at home telling us, we don't know, they were at this organization and whatnot. So we track those, but those data, we don't follow up with calls. We're just taking parents' words for it, but it could be a place, and that's how we gather data. So I would not want to publicly share data that wasn't checked by staff. Additionally, if you understand quarantining, just very similarly to being COVID positive and the number of days out versus coming back, it is very cumbersome just to track COVID positive cases because it's a rolling number of when they became infected, when did they test, how many days would that be before they could come back. If they test sooner and have a second test, they can come back. So the science around it is very specific about those days, and having rolling days with quarantining adds hours and hours of, like, 2 to 3 people. It could be their full-time job every day, and we still wouldn't have a complete set. And so we based our information on what we did know and taking people's words for it, and then judging what we had in case counts back. And so I don't think it's of value to our making decisions. But if the board thinks that that is something we need to do instead of something else, we could adjust our practices.
So I think your item A, member lessons, is you're trying to see if there's a correlation between or impact between our various groups of students.
I guess the core of my issue is that I don't know that the community has really understood the scope of how community spread is negatively influencing our ability to offer in-person learning to our students. And I thought that if there were ultimately some kind of display of data, showing that since the start of the school year, 100, I'm making up numbers, 150 kids, 500 kids, 700 kids, I don't know, on each of these days, like, look at all of these kids whose learning in person has been disrupted by what's going on. Maybe that information is not as easily accessible as I imagined it might be. But I see member Higgins has his hand up.
Yes, member Higgins.
Thank you. I think there are 2 issues here. One is I know that the schools have sent children home because of that. So I don't know if you're maintaining that number. That number would be accurate because that's not relying upon secondhand. I know I've got a grandkids that were sent home because they were in a school because of the lunch. They were next to each other. One of them turns positive and others have been sent home. So when we're looking at the impact of how many days they miss, what we can do in regards to providing some type of continuing education, I think seeing that size of that number could be very important. I agree, there's no way you're going to know how many are staying home because of contact outside of the schools or because of parents' concerns. In this particular case, we had one grandchild who was positive and they kept the other 2 children home. You wouldn't know that. But the ones that were sent home, I would think that those numbers, I understand, would be reported. So those that have been sent home by the schools, and that would be an interesting number there as well in regards to the one, I'm looking at it from what are we going to do for kids that are not, how many days are we missing, and what are we doing from an education standpoint? And the other one is just to understand the decision and the impact it has on education. I think is good for the public.
Any other comments? Yes, member Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam President. I wonder if attendance data wouldn't get us all the way there, but is attendance data more readily available? And could we glean something from that? Obviously, there's other factors like the bus rolling blackouts, but that might be more, it might be a better fix.
From the beginning of the school year. And I guess the question would really be to member lessons because it's her question. But it seems to me like the attendance data might give us a start.
Yeah, I mean, I think
because it's more readily available, I think.
I don't want to burden the staff. I understand staff everywhere from this building across every facility in ASD is working very hard. Yeah. My assumption was that this would be easily accessible. It sounds like that assumption was incorrect. If something like attendance data could give a bit of a snapshot at how COVID may have disrupted students' in-person learning, I feel like that's perhaps a story to share, a fact to share with the community. I think that there's value in sharing information, not just telling them, but sharing the information, because I do think that there are parents and caregivers who want to know the state of our schools.
Member Higgins.
I like Member Jacobs' suggestion because of a couple of reasons. One, if we saw the vacancy, the rate at which people are not showing up, number of people calling in, that would give us a little bit of information. It could be homesick, they could be home because they were sent home, they could have been something. If we had some historical comparison, what do we generally run, then we could see what the difference is, and that would give us some sort of perspective of what the impact has been of the pandemic. So let's looking at it a little bit bigger, but I like that approach. I don't want to, I think that would be a good number as well.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Bishop.
Thank you. And I would just, and given just the work out there, to understand this, the accountability at every level is going to be pushed down. So for me to know at a school level what's happened, I'm asking the school to do more. And I want to share with this board that I don't want to think of things for our schools to do that's going to add to a workload in order to tell a community you should be staying home. I want to focus on education of students, supporting our teachers and teaching and learning. And everything that we come up with an idea here, we have to create a system to capture it. And within the system, because we're so large, it's going to go down and down and down and down. And then that's another layer of work. Now, if it's valuable work, let's go for it. But the outcome, one was to understand where we are. One was to prove to our community that it's affecting schools. I would say that I think they know it is. I think, I don't know that the behavior out there is going to change because of these data. Will it be more information? Sure. But I don't know that our work is going to change because of it, other than more work is going to be done. So although I'm the one that will do the report to the board, IT will create something. Someone is always inputting data. And I responded to a parent today, or a doctor who said, oh, you turned down, $5 million of a grant. Well, yeah. Number one, what that grant asked us to do was so undoable. We couldn't ask school-based people to do one more thing in addition to be responsible for every school. That if you took that, you were responsible for every school, so even private schools and everything. So we said no to that grant and yes to a symptomatic one with testing. We're like picking and choosing the things that add value, and moving, to testing in the high schools is add value, changing things. So I just want to share with the board that it does sound like a great idea to know, but to know for what. And if I ask a school to do one more thing, I just want to be sure that it's going to be worth it, because I just feel I can't ask our nurses to do anymore, or our teachers in the classrooms, or our principals to capture this data to let us know. And you have to picture, it is rolling data. Like one person is off quarantine, another goes on. So how many at a time? They're all looked at individually, and they are captured, and they were passed. So we'd really have to do some research. They were captured as a whole. So we don't know which ones, we could go back and say which letters essentially and talk to teachers. This went home here, this went home here in our numbers, but we added in the phone calls into that. We had staff and students put together. So the data that we captured was really kind of this gross data, not because we weren't looking for it for that reason. We looked at it as how many are currently gone, and we just would do a count of them. So, I don't want to sound whiny, but I just don't want to be a place where we just think of things for schools to do. And that's essentially because it takes all of us to capture these data, from the people entering it to the people compiling it. So I just want to make the board aware, but as you think about that, if this is something that would absolutely be a game changer. Let's do it. Our take and why we didn't do it from the beginning was because it wasn't a game changer for us. Our COVID dashboard is, of how many positive cases, how many this and that. And nowadays, with masks in a classroom, if a child was exposed in a math class and they had masks on, we would still tell parents, and some kids would quarantine, but they didn't have to quarantine. So because of that change, it's like, well, how many did and chose to, and how many decided not? I mean, there's just so much that went into that it's just different, other than the ones that we said, you absolutely have to quarantine because it may have been a mask off, according to what Mr. Higgins said. So it's just not a pretty data set. And to go back to do it, I don't think that it would be worth the work, is what I'm just saying, just from the way it was collected.
So, Dr. Bishop, let me ask you, how do you see, and I'm not so much concerned about community, but as board members, what would be your recommendation for us to get a good sense of the impact of COVID to those groups of students that we have identified in our first monitoring report? And I'm just curious, and it may not be today. It may be something we move toward, because I think that's, in the end, I think impact is what we're trying to look at, impact to specific groups. And is that something that we can do in the next month? Because at some point, not so much to just show people, you see, there's an impact. We know there's an impact. Throughout this whole city, there's an impact. Every family has been impacted. Every group has been. So maybe you could, is it possible for you to meet with staff and see how might that impact, how will we know what that impact is? And maybe not like now, but I'm just trying to figure out how, short of doing exactly what's here, which I think is it's going to be difficult to do. The attendance data is available. I don't know, or we can come back.
Yeah, I mean, I can share anecdotal things. And so how we got our 2% is when we wanted to know what's the effect of quarantining, we did our own little action research, and we took so many schools or classrooms or incidents that had 8 or more students that were asked to go home, where we asked them. So we, knowing that these data are not complete, and then we studied those data of positive tests after quarantining. So that's how we got our number in my recommendation. We had a school actually have about 30% of their kids gone, and we were like, what do we do? We rushed people over there. We triaged this. Let's take a look. Do we have a COVID thing? Whatever. Found out that it was a fair day, and after all the calls, that it was about 100 kids took off because it was the double ticket day at the fair. So, and it was a lot of work and a deployment because we were worried about COVID. And there's just so much going on. And so I just want to be sure that what we want is a value in the end, because we're doing our best to stay on top of it. But I just want everyone to know that an ask at my level to get the type of information that we want is going to take every level of the organization to do something more. And I just try not to ask too much of people because it's a strain every day. Mm-hmm. And I just want to share that. And so I'm still kind of in flux of what this is going to tell us that we don't know already know. Yeah. We know people of poverty are affected more by evidence already.
Member Lessons, would you be willing to move your request, not immediate, maybe short term, or rewrite it all, or redo it all together after we.
I'd like to hear from Member Higgins, who has his hand
Let
raised.
me just ask this, because
Okay,
we're
just let me know.
approaching it from the way of what we want. That maybe the way to approach this is, what do we have? You have attendance records, you have some other things. What type of data would be there to show what the impact right now of attendance versus maybe not last year, the year before? What has been the change, and just data that's already there would be. I don't think anybody wants you to go out there and start saying we have to report things we aren't doing. I was under the impression that they were actually reporting this from interaction that I had with school. I thought that you were getting the how many are being quarantined from the school perspective. And if that's not the case, then that's a different situation. But what type of data do we have that's going to reveal what I think is an appropriate request from Member Lessons? Maybe that's a good way to approach it.
Through the president to Member Higgins. So to be sure, we do know quarantine. We just don't know like when. I mean, we don't have the data on who was a call and who did we ask, nor do we have the data on who did we ask but didn't. You know, who was given the opportunity, could have quarantined but didn't, or like you said, who stayed home and who didn't. So my worry on that is that we would be communicating that something that we did not control the data intake from the beginning. It is kind of messy. Mm-hmm. So that would be just as that's what my doctorate's in, is like system assessment. So that would be really, I'd have a struggle with sharing something that you couldn't. We're giving an assumption that you could make a decision on something that really we didn't control from the beginning. Your idea on the attendance from, say, fall of 2 years ago to fall now is excellent according to percentages. That would be telling about, of the students who are in school, what percentage have been absent for the first 4 weeks of school. And that would share, because the fair was then too, right? So we would know those things. So, that's something that we have, that we could, at our level, just do a quick assessment, because it's already taken at the school level.
Remember,
I think that some sort of move in that direction would be, I would appreciate it. I'm under the assumption that other people around the district might appreciate it as well. And it would be something that I hope wouldn't be a tremendous burden on staff. I'm happy to adjust, retract, compromise. My intention here is transparency and catalyzing change in some way.
Yeah. And our data dashboard can demonstrate attendance, so we can just add that in a cleaner fashion so people could look at that.
Okay, so just to draw this discussion to a close, Member Lessons, you said you would agree to rewrite your request?
Is that the next step? Is a rewritten RFI?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can do that.
And then we will prioritize it as based on what Dr. Bishop said. We can prioritize it as be immediate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you guys. Moving on, we have our item C, and it's in two parts. The first part is our monitoring calendar, which you have the complete calendar. Prior to now, you have only seen one sample, so you have a copy of it in front of you now. It is also on the agenda for us to adopt. So between now and when we meet next time, I would like for everyone to, and some of you already have, because we I've heard you mention from the draft that we had before. But this goes from 2021 to 2026. It reviews our each of our goals and guardrails according to our governance framework. And as you'll see, each month, starting with September to like today, and we're going to practice a little bit with our reading proficiency goal. Are there any questions on the calendar? So you will know what is coming to you each month. You will get your report. If the report meets the conditions of our if it meets the 4 conditions that we're going to review here in a minute. Does it clearly show what's being monitored? Does the data show more than at least 3 previous reporting periods or current or target reporting periods? Does it show next steps? And does it provide evidence that the superintendent's evaluation is there relative to our targets are, we have 5 target areas, and we'll get into it, but you not only have your calendar, which is what I want to make sure you had before you today, so that you can track what's coming. And so that I can participate in the Go monitoring. Any questions on the monitoring calendar? It's pretty self-explanatory. I'd like to thank Kathy for working with me on that and with the superintendent. I saw Carl's hand.
Thank you, Madam President. I have no questions on the calendar. I appreciate it. I think it's great. The one thing I wanted to continue to flag is we almost added it as a guardrail at one point, and I remain interested in it. And I know there's a couple dates coming up in regards to surveying staff as to synergy and connectedness and how things are going. I remain very interested in that data. And making sure we're adequately communicating from all levels of the organization that this is our focus, and getting feedback up as to how that's going.
Thank you. All right. Yes, Dora. Member Wilson.
I just a quick question. Again, I don't have any issues. I think this looks great, and you guys did a fantastic job on the draft of the monitoring calendar. In regard to some of the training, is that possibly something we could sit in the back if we were interested in just seeing what that's composed of, or maybe seeing?
You mean professional development for staff members?
Yes.
Through the president to Member Wilson, if there's room, certainly, we could provide it and to learn more, or we can even provide written information as well. So it would really depend on what it is, especially if it's a Zoom, though. Things are open, to that. And otherwise, room capacity and things like that would be of consideration. But yeah.
So you should submit whatever you're interested in. You just submit it to myself, Superintendent Katie, and we'll figure that out. So that I can participate in our practice, I've asked Cindy, Carol, and Diane to walk us through the next part, which is our actual progress monitoring practice. So welcome, ladies. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, President Bellamy. And thanks for having us here again this evening. We are going to go through a session of practice monitoring. One thing I want you to keep in mind as we do this is that monitoring and the start of monitoring is going to be an iterative process. Often the first 6 months to a year of monitoring is your hardest, and you'll continually be refining and getting better at things. And this goes for both the board and for the superintendent and administrative team. So the report that you're discussing tonight, that may continue to go through various refinements and modifications as well. And that's not uncommon as superintendents and their teams work through this process with you. So the documents you're going to need for this are the Functional Governance Progress Monitoring Student Outcomes document, and then the Reading Proficiency Monitoring Report. So if you can have those in front of you. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know if Member Donnelly has them, but oh, you did. Okay, great.
And the first, we're going to look back at that Progress Monitoring Student Outcomes document a little more. We weren't able to go through that fully last time, and I think it is a valuable thing to do. I believe we got through the first section, but if we can take a look at the second section on the page, how is monitoring beneficial? I know you've had this in front of you for a couple weeks. You've gotten it even prior to that. But if you could take a minute or two to read that section.
Cindy?
Yeah.
I think we have just
You don't have the front page?
Yeah, but Katie will put it up on the screen because we copied the before monitoring and during monitoring. We did not copy the,
the front page.
How is monitoring beneficial and the tips.
Okay.
That's, we had the evaluation document on the other side of the actual who, what, why, how.
Okay.
Okay. And if you want me to, I can, just for time, I can start reading them until they go up.
Well, let's just move on to the, we can come back to that until we're able to post that up. Let's go to the before monitoring.
Okay.
Section.
We have that.
Okay. So looking at that, this outlines the 4 questions that need to be answered before you begin monitoring. President Bellamy was mentioning that earlier. So who will read the first question?
I'll read it.
Sure.
How does it clearly show what is being monitored? Which specific policy, in gold, interpretation, etc.?
Okay, so if you look at the monitoring report, does it clearly show what is being monitored?
I think so.
Yeah, so what does it say is being monitored?
Our reading goal, reading proficiency goal, and interim goal number 1.1.
Yeah. And then who will read question 2?
Does it clearly show data for the 3 previous reporting periods, preferably on a line graph? Does it clearly show the current reporting period? Does it clearly show the target reporting periods, annual and deadline targets?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Member Lessons. Why would you want to have all those data points?
So you can see where you've come from and where you're going.
Yeah, a trend can't be determined from a single data point. So if you don't have multiple reporting periods, you don't have a monitoring report. So does this report show the information outlined in the series of questions in item 2 that you just read?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think as far as it can be since COVID.
Yep, and that is a challenge for nationally with the issue of COVID and data collection. All right, next question 3. Will somebody read that, please?
Does it clearly show the superintendent's evaluation of performance?
Yeah, what does that mean?
My take is that it's an analysis of the data, not just for that added interpretation, but as this data is ultimately used during the superintendent evaluation process as well.
Yeah. So it's you are using that in the. That's right. This is essentially acting as a formative assessment, but that evaluation of the superintendent on the monitoring report can be simply defined as the superintendent's insight about the data. And why would you want to know that from your superintendent? And anybody can answer.
Well, this is Margot. We want to know so we can track how we're doing, whether we are, whether she's doing what we've asked her to do.
Yeah, you can track that. Anyone else?
I feel like it's an opportunity to assess if anything needs to be changed, and feedback from the staff can help her determine what those changes would be to make these goals more successful.
Yeah. So,
And if on track.
yeah. So when the superintendent is giving that evaluation, it allows you to assess whether or not she sees a problem, and if she doesn't see the problem, she's not going to be able to communicate it to staff to solve it. And so this is an opportunity for you to know what she knows that you don't know. So if the data looks good and the superintendent evaluates it as off track, you would want to know her explanation. And that's because as a board, you know a small amount, whereas the superintendent knows quite a lot more, and you want to be really clear on what it is that she knows that you don't. Does anyone see an example of this on the report in front of you?
Something that the superintendent knows that we didn't know.
Well, something that, like I said, you're looking at her evaluation.
Oh, yeah.
And her evaluation as well as the data that she's evaluating. And what I mentioned is sometimes the data can look different than what the evaluation that the superintendent has given.
I can share, Cindy, the way I put it together.
No, no, that's all right. We'll let them keep hashing it out here.
Can you just restate the question, Cindy? I'm sorry.
How about let's do this. Take a look at the superintendent's evaluation on reading proficiency goal peaks. Do you see what that is?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Do you see the red square that says far below target?
Far below target, yes.
Okay. And then what does the data for 2020, 2021 right below that indicate? On page 3 of the report.
Okay, so below target, interim goal 1.1 overall progress is below target.
Yeah, and if you look at
are you looking at?
We talked about that, and now what right below it? There's 2020, 2021.
Yeah, 38.8%.
And what is that according to the legend?
At the number of students who are who are below the target.
Yeah, so the overall evaluation has been marked as far below target, while the data evaluation for 2020, 2021 is below target. Mm-hmm. So look at the same for the superintendent's evaluation on reading proficiency interim goal 1.1. What is that?
Hold on.
I'll chime in because I took notes. On the 1.1, it said that we're below target, but I recall Dr. Bishop saying she thinks that we're really more below target, not far below target, given summer school. That was the insight that I recall you sharing 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so if you look at that reading proficiency interim goal 1.1 fast bridge, it lists the interim goal. Right below it, interim goal overall progress is marked below target. The 2020, 2021 data is marked far below target. So we're not going to talk about this right now, but if it wasn't on your list of questions for the monitoring conversation ahead as to why that is, then this is your hint that is probably a question you're going to want to ask the superintendent.
Yeah.
Okay. So finally, number 4. Somebody read that for me, please?
number 4?
Mhm.
Do you have it?
Does it clearly show supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation? If the district is not at target or the superintendent's evaluation indicates implementation is on track, not on track, does the monitoring report clearly describe any needed next steps?
Yes.
And do you have that in this monitoring report?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and just to clarify, when we're talking about the superintendent's evaluation on this report, it's the superintendent's assessment of what the reality is toward achievement of the goals. So that is defined in those peaks and fast bridge legends. And then that is the assessment that the superintendent has given, that below target for on the 1.1 and the far below target on the peak school. Does anybody have any questions on those four items or that section?
No, but I'll volunteer that as many questions as I know that I submitted, it didn't strike me that that was what the assessment was. So maybe just a simple label like, hey guys, superintendent's assessment right here. Or at least we'll be able to identify that next time.
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, and so if I'm understanding, you're suggesting that a more clear label of that on the report itself might be helpful.
Okay, I got it, Ken.
Okay, so what if your answer was no to any one of those four questions?
We wouldn't accept the data. We would ask that the administration resubmit at a future meeting.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. And just when you receive these reports, you do receive them in advance. So this should be one of the first things that you scrutinize the report for, and it can be flagged at that moment and returned to the superintendent to for that additional work on it to make sure that all of those components are there. Okay, if we can move back to those, we'll just quickly go over that last section on page 1 of the document, tips for effective monitoring. Is everybody able to see those? And if you could just read.
It's on we have it on the monitor if they don't have
great.
One of them. I have my copy.
Okay. Yeah, just take a minute or two to read through that. And when you're ready, anyone can share, is there a particular tip that resonates with you?
Just one. I have two. I can just do one. It's Margot.
Yeah.
The doing your homework one and the no gotcha governance.
Yeah. Why do those resonate with you?
Well, with this kind of information, I like that we get it early so you have time to really read it and think about it and write up your questions. It just allows for a more thoughtful process so each of us, in order for it to really be effective, I think we have to commit to doing our homework. And I think that there's something about that in our bylaws as well, like we come ready to work. And then the no gotcha governance is making sure that we use the time we have to ask questions. I think our processes allow us to ask questions, any question we want, and making sure that we don't put the superintendent on the spot, making sure that we don't put staff on the spot, but making sure that we use those avenues that we have set up to make sure that whatever question board members have, they're not censored or they're not filtered. Just send them in so we know that they're coming. I think that's, and so that the staff can prepare. So when it comes to having this document 2 weeks in advance, I feel like within those 2 weeks, I should be able to get whatever clarifications, understandings I need to be able to work when we get to the actual session of monitoring. That's just me.
Thank you.
I see Dora has her hand up.
Okay.
Understanding reality is what resonated with me. Our expectations, our assumptions, sometimes are different than what our students are actually currently able to achieve based on whatever the circumstances are. So it's just the understanding reality, actually getting concrete data for me to look at. And that progress is really, really nice. Positive progress is what I always tell my kids. I always look for positive progress. So the expectation is here as well. So it's nice to have that actual concrete data and the understanding of what's really going on in the schools.
Yeah, thank you. And this is definitely your opportunity to inquire, to have those inquiries in order to get that deeper understanding of the data that the superintendent has put in front of you for monitoring. Anyone else want to share?
I mean, I'll just echo what Member Wilson said about understanding reality. I think last night at a community council meeting, somebody asked me about was I aware of the recently released PEAKS data? And to be honest, I wasn't. I was so dialed into this particular subset of data that I hadn't really put the PEAKS data. But I think it's an important reminder that the public wants us to make sure that we know what the scope of the current reality is. So that was a good reminder that it's important for us to know our current reality.
Yeah.
Was she mentioning like school by school? I was just about to say like the district.
Yeah, it's right there.
More specific, like third, fourth, fifth, sixth.
Back to you, Cindy.
Okay. Anyone else want to share before we move on? Okay. And then I just want to point you, so all of those benefits that we that are in that section above, which the communicating expectations, the formative evaluation, clarifying strategies, and leading by examples. The benefits of monitoring happen when the monitoring is effective. So those tips that you just went through for effective monitoring are what is going to help you reap the benefits of the monitoring. And then finally, the last page of that document is a rubric that the board can use after monitoring to reflect on their effectiveness of the monitoring session. Like I said, this is a process that you will continue to get better and better at, and this will be helpful as you're building that muscle toward becoming effective and reaping those benefits of the monitoring. Does anybody have any questions on that portion of the document? And then this is also, I think you might find that useful as well as you formulate your individual questions that you'll ask regarding monitoring reports as well. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and begin the monitoring conversation in a role play format. Like President Bellamy said, I will be acting as the chair so that she has the opportunity to participate in the practice as well. So I'm going to open up our monitoring conversation regarding Goal 1, which is beginning in September 2020. The percentage of third grade students proficient in reading on the state summative test currently peaks will increase from 40% to 80% by May 2026. And also interim goal 1.1, the percentage of K2 students at or above the reading benchmark on interim assessments, FastBridge curriculum-based measures will increase from 37.5 in spring 2021 to 80% in spring 2024. First, I want to assert to the board that all four components of the report that we look for before monitoring are present. First, it clearly shows what is being monitored. It shows the data for the previous reporting periods, current reporting period, and target reporting periods. It shows the superintendent's evaluation of performance via the peaks and FastBridge color legends. For peaks, the superintendent has evaluated red, far below target, and for interim goal 1.1, the superintendent has evaluated orange, below target. And finally, it shows supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation via the tables provided. It also indicates next steps. The monitoring, progress monitoring document that you have in front of you lists a set of questions to ask during monitoring and delineating between who, what, why, and how questions. So as we are ready to have the progress monitoring conversation, the first part of the conversation is to dig into the data itself, with the later part of the conversation being more forward focused. In other words, we'll begin with any questions that fall into the who, what, why categories of inquiry first, for the purpose of understanding the current reality for our students as compared to the goal. Once those types of questions have been exhausted, and in other words, once the board fully knows what the current reality is, then we'll move on to the how category of questions to hear what the superintendent has planned in response to the data. With that conversation logic model in mind, the floor is now open for the board to engage in inquiry regarding the reading proficiency monitoring report. Who has the first question for the superintendent?
Well, I'll start. Dr. Bishop, can you just review, or at least who is struggling the most? And yeah, I'll start with that question. Just who in your assessment is struggling the most?
Thank you, Madam President. So if we take a look at English language arts in peaks, in both 2021 and 2019, student groups with the lowest grade proficiencies were Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, as well as special education. Following the other two groups with them are Alaska Native students and Black students.
Thank you.
What's the next question?
Next question. Dora, did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Dora had her hand up.
Regarding the number of students eligible and number of students participating, can you tell me why some of those students are not participating? Can you explain the circumstances as to why all students are not participating?
Sure, that's a great question. And from spring of 19 to the spring of 21, of course, there's a large significant change. The year in between is not reported because that was the year that the assessment was put on hold when we first experienced the initial onset of COVID, the spring of 20. So that's not there. So essentially in 19, we had the percentage of students, we had a large percentage of students at school. In the new year, we have students that are enrolled with us, but may not have been present at the time of test, may not have felt that they needed to test, as well as many of our students who were on an at-home learning program, whether it was through like a traditional one, even family partnership or Frontier, may not have, the assessment to come into school to take an assessment may not have been a priority. So we struggled in these years, not only with, percent of students taking the test, but even just percent of students being in school each day.
I'll go next. One of the questions that I had is what accounts for improvements among ASD's English learners between 19 and 21, such that more participated, but also they showed above average growth. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that was, and there's, we don't have any set, we can have some, guesses, real educated guesses. And there's a couple of things going on. And one has to do with, we did make a major change in ELL after a couple years in the district, and some board members who were here. We really moved from more of a support with tutoring model to very high quality instruction in the classroom where more ELL students had access to core classes. That's in discussion with staff without doing an in-depth analysis. That was one of the things we literally, in looking back at some of the actions, we did have a major change in the function of ELL. And the board heard about it here because we moved from lots of TA jobs to fewer teaching jobs, but the teaching was the instruction was, and access to courses was greater. So we had some success there, but because we don't have the trend data of that, it's very difficult to share. Another theory that did come up is that in general, this category of students who are English language learners many times are Asian, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic. And the makeups of those groups changed. We grew, but the percentage of makeups in those groups were very different. So a category that has somewhat higher than Alaska or Native Pacific Islanders, Hawaiian Native, is Asian. And there were actually this year more Asian students in that full set than there were Pacific Islanders. And that's also a theory that came up, that maybe just the makeup of the students was different and this had something to attribute to it. But we don't have longitudinal data to say and to really scope out and pull out to say, oh, this maybe was the change that occurred. So those are two discussions. One, highly effective instruction and access to higher level courses. We did make a major change in leadership in that category. I think that the present director is a great instructional leader, and her team in ELL really made these changes. But also we'd have to acknowledge the change in students, and we don't know without longitudinal data what was the change. Was it the change in the students or that? Because you'd have to have a beginning and an end for each of those students, and we just haven't pulled those data, and we don't know if you'd have a full set.
Okay. Just a quick bit of coaching here. As you are asking questions, it's always beneficial to point to specify which data you are looking at. So if you could reference the page, the table, or whatever it refers to, that is always helpful. So just something to keep in mind. But you all are doing great. So who has another who, what, or why question for the superintendent?
Any more who, what, or whys? Go on, Kelly.
Are we talking just the peaks one?
No, it can be
Or
The entire report.
the entire
Is
report.
open.
the report. Okay.
Yeah. Who, what, or why?
Who, what, or why? I have a lot of questions. Hold on. Okay, I guess this was a bigger question. Looking at sort of the category of schools that are on target or below target. And I guess my question was, what do you think can explain the differences, the discrepancies among the K2 assessment, FastBridge assessment outcomes? So that would be the interim goal, 1.1, such that 14 of our schools are on target and above, and 41 schools are below target.
To that question, it really does go back, and we talk about this as headwinds and tailwinds, that different schools have different populations and test at different proficiency levels when they enter. And so outside of growth, just what they come in at. And generally speaking, in Anchorage, I can tell you that all of our on-target schools are in affluent areas, while most of our schools off target are in Title I, and they're not. No Title I school was near target or on target for the winter or spring in FastBridge. However, we did have affluent schools. Not all affluent schools were on target, but of the ones that are, they are the most affluent student populations.
And why do you think that is? Other than some kids coming with more advantages or more headwinds?
Sure.
Or having more headwinds or tailwinds?
Yeah. If you can picture, and I've shared before that experiences, and a lot of our graduation or our career and college life is about this too. Mm-hmm. It's more than a number. It's really about what experiences go into someone being successful later. And that is true between birth and 5 as well, those that have read on other instances. And many of our children, of what I can influence and not influence, when they get to school, we can influence them. But children grow up in different homes. In some homes, we have a large ELL population. If they're being assessed on their reading of English and they don't speak that at home, that's going to be a headwind for them. If they're in homes that don't have a lot of books or discussions with them because they're, stressed homes where parents are working quite a bit. And this happens also in affluent homes as well, but interactions with children, building vocabulary, the key features of being successful in school, of having vocabulary, really having one of the things we realized this year with our students coming in, that even school itself and having the routines that schools offer, and that of it in itself actually supports students learning, because we're finding that we're reteaching lots of skills in first grade that used to be learned in kindergarten, and just self-efficacy of how to hang things up, how to go get your lunch. So different populations really, and different kids, their prior experiences may influence, and sometimes those prior experiences of having another language will become a superpower later on, right? Mm-hmm. But engaging kids in school and doing what we can, help support that. So.
Okay.
And there's research on this, just so you know. Title I actually came from what's called Chapter 1 in the 1960s. They wanted to understand They actually have, maybe I should do, like, evidence that kids do learn in school, and from where they enter to where they exit. And a lot of that was very, very similar. And what determined some of those Title I, it was called Chapter 1 at the time, it was a Jinx and Jinx study, is that inputs matter. And so a lot of our title was to really provide some additional supports to economically disadvantaged, because that truly by research is demonstrated as some of those experiences not all kids get due to economics even. And that's how what we know as Title I was Chapter 1 came about in the 60s.
Okay, just a quick time check. Am I correct in that we have about 8 minutes left?
That is correct.
Okay. So what we're going to do real quick is jump ahead in the meeting where you're going to be reviewing this monitoring report. During your business meeting, you'll have the opportunity to ask more of your who, what, why questions, but we're going to jump ahead quick. And this is what that would look like. So we've been looking in a backwards facing direction, doing a retrospective analysis regarding Goal 1 and Interim Goal 1.1. Now I'd like to invite those future focused questions from the board. So those are those how related questions that inquire about what changes will happen based on the data. And just to note that a valuable thing to do here, you might have some already formulated questions, but also as you're hearing the responses to your who, what, why questions, you might be formulating how questions based on those responses that you've received as well. So who has a how category question, a question about which changes will happen based on the data? And is there someone that has one that we haven't heard from yet?
I'm not seeing any volunteers.
Okay, then someone who has one. And we'll take one and then we'll move on.
All right, I'll ask another one.
Yeah.
I don't know if it entirely fits your bill. It is a how question. And it was about teachers. And the question was, how will teachers and principals be involved in collaborative feedback loops or cycles, as mentioned on the approach slide?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what I would encourage you to do is ask the superintendent more of an open-ended question regarding her strategies around response to the data, less than the her strategy, the implementation strategies, because what
it's an input question.
Okay. I didn't hear what was.
Oh, she said it was an input question.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that was an input question. So what you're trying to gauge is what strategies the superintendent, your role isn't to advise strategy, which inadvertently can happen when the assumption is that when your question makes an assumption. So if you can reframe a how question.
What you really want to know is how staff is professional, how they're being trained, or based on the data, what are we doing different with staff? Or
I guess I was genuinely interested in understanding what the collaborative instructional improvement cycles would look like. And I get that it's an input question. So I'm not sure.
How is that going to improve movement toward the goal? How do you know that that's going to improve movement toward your goal?
Well, I think that an answer.
I'm asking this. Yeah, I'm suggesting that as a reframing of the question for the superintendent.
Yeah. How will it move us towards the goal? That's a great question. Really, it helps us understand where our students are and understanding our learning data and understanding what students know now and how they're going to get there. And so when we have that model of providing the professional development, it's difficult to expect teachers to change behavior or principals or superintendents when we need the knowledge to be able to do that. One of the things is, student outcomes won't change until adult behaviors change. So we want to change the learning behaviors of students. We need to change the teaching behaviors of ourselves. And so where do we start? Well, we start by looking at where we are and providing professional development where the gaps are. So understanding with this particular goal, it would be in the efficacy of our reading, and are we using best practices according to, evidence-based reading, and do we know how to teach it? And so we bring that together, we collaborate, we improve our instruction, we look at data again, did that work? Yes or no? The meetings themselves actually occur at the school level, not here. And so while we will take a look in elementary, and each director who has 15 schools will say, oh, where are my schools and how can I support this? Principals at their own level will be working with their instructional coaches and the teachers of each grade level to say, where are our kids in this grade level? And what are the things that they know and don't know? And could this be related to access to, did we even teach this? And if we did teach it, are we teaching effectively for students to learn? And so the feedback actually happens in addition to every day just having an instructional coach or a principal there to assist, or your colleague next door to ask, what are you doing? Your kids seem to get this and mine don't. You always have that and just that relational capacity. But the actual data meetings that occur will engender, everyone's invited. They're not exclusive meetings. They talk about student learning and what can be done in the evidence and what supports are needed. And so they're not exclusive of anyone, they're inclusive to utilize to find best practices and move forward. So I think that will make a difference in student learning behaviors.
Okay, so I know we're running out of time, and thank you. Thank you for that. You're going to be going through this conversation again during your meeting this evening with Chair Bellamy, obviously facilitating that. And her role in facilitation will be to help align the monitoring conversation with those tips for effectiveness. And so you can expect that she might ask you to hold your how questions until the who, what, why questions have been asked. And you might also hear her asking you to reframe questions that iterate advice or that are outside of the scope of the monitoring report. And then keep in mind that the facilitation of these conversations also takes some practice. And at some point down the road, you each might expect to be handed the baton and facilitating the conversation yourselves. So just be thinking about that. And again, thinking about that evaluating quality of monitoring sheet as you're asking your questions, and that who, what, why, because the purpose of monitoring, again, while I understand the interest and inputs, and that is all information that might be accessible, understanding the reality and the superintendent's how of addressing it going forward is really, really what's important to glean from this conversation. And then once your conversation is over, President Bellamy may be asking you to go ahead and use that evaluation rubric to reflect on how your session during the meeting goes tonight. And I will let her take care of that at the time. as she sees fit. Does anybody have any questions before we sign off?
Member Lessons has a question.
Yeah, I'm just, so there is an ideal of spending a substantial amount of our time into goal monitoring. Do we have a general timeline for the evening, just so we can say we should really prepare for 30 minutes of goal monitoring, an hour of goal monitoring? I'm just sort of the overall,
So
is there a plan?
My plan is at least an hour. Hopefully, as we get into the process, that could be longer, which means we may make adjustments to our agenda, but we'll just see how it goes. It's a work in progress. So I thank you guys for participating.
Yeah, and thank you all. And as you see, your support team is here as well. And always feel free to call on any of us if you have questions. And then also just to remind you, I would encourage during your meeting monitoring session for someone to ask those questions about the superintendent's chosen evaluation of the data versus the 2021 data for both peaks and the Fast Bridge assessment. I think the answer might be something you want to hear. So with that, we will leave you to it. Thank you again.
And thank you, Cindy, Carol, Kimberly, Leslie, and
Diane.
Down there. Oh,
Diane is here.
Diane, is that Diane? Okay, thank you guys.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
That brings us to, thank you. We need to adjourn to executive session with the understanding that you will take a meal break in between.
But it would begin at 5.
And we will begin at 5. So can I get a motion to move into executive session?
I move that we move into executive session
For the purpose of?
for the purpose of negotiations.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved in second. We'll begin at 5.
Mark is still out.